Welcome to the RAIN podcast, where we dive deep into the questions that shape our lives and help you reign over your challenges. I'm Mike, and today we're exploring a topic that affects every single one of us, the mysterious ebb and flow of motivation.
And I'm Sarah. You know, Mike, it's fascinating how one day we can feel like we could conquer the world, bursting with energy and drive, and the next day we can barely convince ourselves to get out of bed. Have you ever wondered why that happens? All the time, Sarah, and I know our listeners have too. That feeling when motivation suddenly abandons you can be so disheartening, like something's wrong with you. But what I've learned is that this fluctuation is actually completely normal. That's exactly right, and understanding the psychology behind why our motivation rises and falls can be incredibly empowering. It means we're not broken when we feel unmotivated, we're just human.
I love that perspective. You know, I remember a time in my life when I was working on writing a book, something I was genuinely passionate about. And yet there were weeks when I couldn't type a single word. I felt like a failure, questioning if I really wanted it badly enough.
That sounds really tough. What happened?
Well, I eventually learned that motivation isn't a personality trait. It's not something you either have or don't have. It's more like a river that naturally rises and falls depending on various factors. Once I understood that, I stopped beating myself up during the low periods and developed strategies to work with my natural cycles.
That's such an important insight, and it reminds me of something I learned from self-determination theory, one of the major psychological frameworks for understanding motivation. According to this theory, we all have 3 basic psychological needs that fuel our motivation: autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Can you break those down for us, Sarah?
Sure thing. Autonomy is our need to feel like we're making our own choices rather than being controlled. Competence is our desire to master things and feel effective, and relatedness is our need for meaningful connection with others. When these needs are met, our intrinsic motivation, that inner drive, tends to flourish, but when they're thwarted, our motivation often plummets.
That makes so much sense. Looking back at my book writing struggle, I realized I had started focusing on what my critics might say, rather than writing the story I wanted to tell. I'd lost my sense of autonomy.
Exactly. And our brains are actually designed to experience these motivation fluctuations. Let's talk about dopamine, the neurotransmitter often called the motivation molecule. It's released when we anticipate rewards, driving us to take action.
So is that why we feel so excited when we first start a new project or set a new goal?
Yes, our brains release dopamine when we imagine achieving our goals, creating that initial burst of excitement and motivation. But here's the thing. Dopamine responds most strongly to novelty and unexpected rewards. As something becomes familiar or predictable, we get less of that dopamine hit and motivation can wane.
So that explains the classic New Year's resolution effect, where everyone's pumped up in January, but by February, the gym is empty again.
Precisely. And it's not just a matter of willpower. Our brains literally give us less chemical reward for continuing something familiar than for starting something new. This reminds me of a story one of our listeners shared with us. Do you mind if I share it, Sarah?
Please do. This is about Maria, who struggled with her fitness journey for years. She'd start strong, going to the gym 5 days a week, completely transforming her diet overnight. But inevitably, after a few weeks, her motivation would crash, and she'd find herself back where she started, feeling worse than before.
I think many of us can relate to that pattern.
Absolutely. What changed for Maria was understanding these motivation cycles we're talking about. Instead of trying to overhaul her entire life at once, she started with a 5-minute daily walk. That's it. And she paired it with something she genuinely enjoyed, listening to her favorite podcast.
So she was building a habit using a natural reward rather than relying solely on willpower and motivation.
Exactly. And gradually, those 5-minute walks became 10 minutes, then 20. Eventually, she found herself craving more challenging workouts. Fast forward 3 years, and she's completed multiple marathons. But what's remarkable isn't just her physical transformation. It's how she describes her relationship with motivation now.
How does she describe it?
She says she's learned to surf the waves of motivation rather than fight against them. On high motivation days, she pushes herself further. On low motivation days, she sticks to her minimum commitment, which might just be a short walk, but she never misses it completely, which keeps the habit alive.
That's beautiful, and it highlights something crucial. Sustainable motivation isn't about feeling motivated all the time. It's about building systems that carry you through when motivation inevitably dips. Absolutely. And speaking of those dips, I think it's worth talking about some common psychological barriers that can tank our motivation. What are some patterns you've noticed, Sarah? One big one is perfectionism, that all or nothing thinking that says if you can't do something perfectly, there's no point doing it at all. Another is lack of clarity. When our goals are vague or overwhelming, motivation tends to plummet. Those are huge. I'd add fear of failure to that list. So many times we're not actually lacking motivation. We're afraid of what might happen if we try and don't succeed. That reminds me of James's story. Do you know him? He was a brilliant PhD student who nearly dropped out because of chronic procrastination. Everyone, including his advisors, thought he was just lazy or uncommitted. What was really going on? Fear of failure, exactly as you said. James had been a perfect student his whole life, and his identity was wrapped up in academic success. His dissertation represented such a huge potential for failure that he was paralyzed by anxiety, which showed up as lack of motivation.
How did he overcome it?
First, by recognizing what was really happening. Once he understood his procrastination was actually fear, he could address the real issue. He started with tiny commitments, just 15 minutes of work per day, no matter how he felt.
That sounds like that minimum viable commitment approach again.
Exactly. But the real breakthrough came when he reconnected with why he wanted to do this research in the first place. His work could help people suffering from a rare disease, something deeply aligned with his values. By reconnecting with purpose, his motivation shifted from fear-based to meaning-based. That's powerful, and it highlights something I think is so important: the relationship between our goals, our values, and sustained motivation. Absolutely. Research consistently shows that when our goals align with our deeper values and sense of purpose, our motivation becomes more resilient to the ups and downs that inevitably come.
I experienced this myself during a particularly difficult time in my career. I was working at a high-paying job that looked impressive on paper, but I felt empty inside. My motivation was at rock bottom, and I couldn't figure out why. I had achieved what I thought I wanted.
What was missing?
Meaning. My work didn't connect to anything I truly valued. I was chasing external markers of success rather than what actually mattered to me. The turning point came during a conversation with a mentor who asked me a simple question. If money and status weren't factors, what work would you find meaningful?
That's such a clarifying question.
It was for me. The answer led me to make a career shift that aligned more closely with my values. And while I still experience motivation fluctuations, we all do, they don't derail me the way they used to. Because even on days when I'm not feeling it, I still believe in the underlying purpose of what I'm doing.
That touches on something I think is crucial for our listeners to understand. Sustainable motivation isn't about eliminating the lows, it's about building the resilience to weather them.
Exactly. And there are practical ways to do that. Let's share some strategies that have been proven to help manage motivation fluctuations.
I'll start with one that's backed by loads of research, breaking down big goals into smaller, achievable steps. Our brains respond positively to progress, and small wins create momentum.
Love that one. I'd add the importance of tracking that progress visually, whether it's a simple checklist, a habit tracker, or a journal. Seeing your progress taps into that reward system we talked about earlier.
Another powerful strategy is environment design, structuring your surroundings to make desired behaviors easier and undesired behaviors harder. For instance, if you want to read more, keep books visible and your phone in another room.
That's something I practice daily. And here's one more that's been game-changing for me: expectation management. Instead of expecting to feel motivated all the time, I plan for motivation dips. I have predetermined minimum viable actions for low motivation days.
That's so wise. And it brings us to a critical point, the difference between motivation and commitment. Motivation is a feeling that naturally fluctuates. Commitment is a decision that can remain steady regardless of how you feel.
That's profound, Sarah, and I think that's what ultimately transformed my approach to my book project and other areas of my life, recognizing that I can act even when motivation is low based on my commitment to what matters to me.
Exactly. And research shows that action often precedes motivation, not the other way around. Sometimes you have to start moving before you feel like moving.
That reminds me of a quote I love. Motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going.
That's perfect. And speaking of keeping going, as we wrap up today's episode, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with, Mike?
I'd say this. Be gentle with yourself during the low motivation periods. They're not character flaws. They're part of being human. The goal isn't to eliminate them, but to build a life where you can honor your commitments and values even when motivation ebbs. Beautiful. And I'd add, remember that motivation, like all emotions, is information, not a command. When your motivation dips, get curious about what that might be telling you. Sometimes it's signaling that you need rest. Other times it might be suggesting that your goals need realignment with your deeper values. That's such an insightful perspective, Sarah. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the science of motivation to personal stories of overcoming motivation challenges. We hope this conversation helps you navigate your own motivation fluctuations with more understanding and self-compassion.
And if you found value in today's episode, please remember to subscribe to the RAIN podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Your support helps us continue creating content that empowers you to reign over life's challenges.
We'd also love to hear your stories about motivation. What works for you, what challenges you've overcome, or questions you still have. You can reach us through our website or social media channels.
Thank you for listening to the RAIN podcast. Until next time, remember, motivation may come and go, but your commitment to what matters most can remain steadfast.
Take care, everyone, and we'll catch you in the next episode.